Hello, and welcome to the Dwayne Morris Money and Banking Law Podcast with Joe Silvia, brought to you by the global law firm of Dwayne Morris. I'm your host, Joe Silvia, and I'm a former Federal Reserve lawyer who represents banks, fintechs, and other clients on M&A, payments, and regulatory matters at Dwayne Morris. I'm also a core member of our banking, fintech, and digital assets and blockchain practices. The goal of the Dwayne Morris Money and Banking Law Podcast is to inform and educate our clients and friends on both the fundamental concepts and structure of the banking ecosystem, as well as critical developments in the law and regulation of money and banking. On this episode, we're talking about blockchain. I've been fortunate to talk to many bankers and other financial services professionals over the last decade or so about blockchain, digital ledger technology, and some of the basics that they should at least be thinking about and be aware of. And as I was thinking about future episodes for our podcast, I thought it might be a good idea to revisit some of the basic components of blockchain, what digital ledger technology is, how the blockchain works, or how a blockchain works, and then kind of talk about some of the benefits and challenges that have been discussed, sometimes for years, but even some in new scenarios that we're seeing pop up. But it strikes me that this would be an important issue for any number of financial services professionals, lawyers, consultants, compliance folks, in-house folks, anybody at a fintech or financial institution, financial services company, because it's just moving so quickly. And what we're seeing and talking about, especially in the digital asset space, which of course blockchain plays a pivotal role, but in our digital assets blockchain practice, we are having a lot of conversations with folks with really novel products, novel activities, either trying to bring them to market, getting licensed to do so, or anything in between. But, there's still a lot of people that we speak with who would benefit from going back in time and talking a little bit about the very, very basic construct of what blockchain technology really is. And so that's the goal of today's podcast. It won't be a long one, but my goal is to provide an overview of blockchain, how it works, use cases, potentially some legal issues that we've either seen or that we may see in the future. So stay tuned and buckle up. It's going to be an interesting one. Okay, so let's jump in. What is the blockchain? Where did it come from? Well, it first emerged as the technology behind Bitcoin, which is just one form of digital currency. It was introduced by Satoshi Nakamoto, who no one really knows whether it's an individual or more likely a group of individuals, in a white paper from 2008-2009 that was entitled Bitcoin, a Peer-to-Peer Electronic Cash System. In the Bitcoin context, the blockchain is a distributed public ledger of all the Bitcoin transactions that have occurred to date, and it's in a peer-to-peer network. The beauty of this distributed public ledger and the way that the blockchain works is that it prevents double spending of Bitcoin. The digital ledger is distributed across a network of what are called nodes. Each of the nodes, which is a computer essentially, has a copy of this ledger, this distributed public ledger called the blockchain. Now, the blockchain is just one type of distributed ledger technology, DLT. There's a couple of different kinds of ledgers that are important in the digital asset, digital currency ecosystem. The one that we're familiar with is really the centralized ledger, which is, of course, centralized in one central location. There's a decentralized group of ledgers, which are not centralized in one location, but have multiple kind of points of entry, centralized locations. But then what we talk about in the Bitcoin context with the Bitcoin blockchain or the Bitcoin ledger, that ledger is a distributed ledger. So as I mentioned, it's a public distributed ledger. So there is no centralized authority in control of the ledger itself. So I mentioned DLT or distributed ledger technology. This is the technology that permits the storage, the tracking, and processing of information, right? It's a transaction management system. This distributed ledger or distributed database, another way to think about it, is distributed across a peer-to-peer network of computers. It's a single version of the truth, this blockchain, right? The blockchain represents a single version of the truth, a single version of all the transactions that have taken place with respect to that particular blockchain or distributed ledger over the course of its life. It removes the need for intermediaries like banks. That's not to say that banks and other traditional financial services companies don't play a role in this context with respect to blockchain or distributed ledger technology. We'll talk about that in a minute. But it removes the need for intermediaries in terms of verification of transactions. So this distributed ledger is replicated on thousands of computers. Like I mentioned, these computers are called nodes. They're all connected to this ledger. And essentially what that means in this context with the Bitcoin blockchain, because it's public, anyone with a computer can go in and look at the actual blockchain. They can view the blocks of transactions as they happen, as they occur, and you can go all the way back to the initial block called the Genesis block if you wanted to see a trail of all the transactions. The blockchain provides essentially a proof of who owns what at any given moment, because every single transaction is displayed on this single version of the truth, the blockchain. So how is this a single version of the truth? How does it account for all of the transactions that happen? Well, it's constantly synchronized. So in other words, the ledger is always essentially up to date. Now, different blockchains and different technologies have different timelines for how often they are updated or synchronized. But in the Bitcoin blockchain context, at this point, it's synchronized every 10, 12, 15 minutes or so. And so each of those time periods have a block associated with them by which each of the transactions that occur with respect to Bitcoin, for example, get put into a block of transactions. And then once they are verified and approved by the system of nodes connected to the blockchain, which we'll talk about in a minute, they are then added to the blockchain. Okay, so the block of transactions is added to the existing chain of blocks that came before it. The blockchain technology and distributed ledger technology is secured by what's called cryptography. It essentially means that data is encrypted from end to end so that it ensures the transactions are all valid. And we'll see how this happens in a minute. We'll talk about this, how it happens. So some key characteristics to remember about the blockchain or distributed ledger technology more broadly. It's essentially a massive database, a massive ledger, okay? In the Bitcoin context, remember, Bitcoin is a digital currency. Blockchain is the technology that underlies the transactions that happen in that digital currency. So in the Bitcoin context, the blockchain underlying Bitcoin transactions is a public blockchain. So anyone in the world with a computer can go into and see the public blockchain and view Bitcoin transactions that have transpired. In addition, it is a distributed ledger. Okay, it's distributed ledger technology. Okay, so there is no central authority with ultimate control. The authority and the trust is distributed amongst all of the individual nodes, computers, and players within the ecosystem. Additionally, distributed ledger technology is immutable and it's permanent, meaning that transactions can't be undone, but rather a new transaction correcting the previous transaction must be approved and posted to the blockchain. It's also constantly synchronized, but it's also highly reliable. It's secured by cryptography, and this trips a lot of people up, this security feature, because we focus so much on the anonymity and the ability for bad actors to potentially use this kind of technology for nefarious acts related to money laundering and conducting illicit transactions and the like. So how does it work? Well, like I mentioned before, there's thousands of computers that are connected to the blockchain. They're connected to the internet, which houses the blockchain. Each computer simultaneously maintains a copy of the existing or the current blockchain. There's no official copy of it, and no computer is more valid than any other. So each of these computers has the ability to verify the transactions and therefore the blockchain ledger. This is the distributed nature of the ledger technology. Computers that are connected to the blockchain, once a transaction is posted to be validated, it gets sent out to the universe of nodes. And these nodes race to validate the transactions that are proposed to be added to the blockchain. Then they create the new blocks and have them added to the chain once that validation takes place. So these nodes race by essentially solving complex mathematical problems, and the winner, which is why they race, is rewarded with Bitcoin, at least in the Bitcoin blockchain contexts. In other blockchain contexts, the rewards are something different. This process of racing to solve a problem is called mining. And so a node that engages in this process is called a miner. And so once a miner solves the problem and validates the transaction data, it broadcasts the solution and proposed block with the transaction data to all the other miners in the network. If the majority of the miners in the network agree and verify the transaction data that's housed in that proposed block, they come to what's called consensus. Once the new block is verified and accepted, it's added to the blockchain and linked to the previous block. As I mentioned before, blocks can be added to the blockchain, but they can't be removed. Transactions can't be removed from a specific block. So each block contains a record of the transactions along with a timestamp, digital signature, and reference to the immediately preceding block. So this is what I mentioned before. This is how you can actually go into the blockchain, look at the transaction data, because it's all linked by algorithm and it's immutable, means you can't undo it. And since it's a linear chain going all the way back to the Genesis block, you can actually use technology, use the ledger to go back and look at previous transactions. In order to compromise the security of the Bitcoin blockchain or a public blockchain like this one, essentially a hacker would need to hack and control more than half of the nodes in that blockchain. So this is why we say that the Bitcoin blockchain, at least, is immutable. Because in order for a hacker to control more than half the nodes, it's just not practically going to happen. It's not practical for one hacker or a group of hackers or a group of nefarious actors to hack and control half of the thousands and thousands of nodes that are part of the blockchain. Going back to the consensus mechanism, this is the critical feature of blockchain. It's the validation process for the transactions that are proposed to be added to the ledger. The validation process is, like I mentioned, this consensus mechanism. This is the way in which a majority or all network participants will agree on the validity of a proposed transaction, making it thus immutable, which can then cause the ledger to be updated. There's a couple of different mechanisms to achieve consensus, and I'll just mention them here without going into too deep of detail, at least on this podcast. But they use algorithms. One is proof of work, which is traditionally used in a permissionless distributed ledger technology. And there's proof of stake, which is used more so in a permissioned distributed ledger technology. These consensus mechanisms also incorporate security through what I've mentioned before, cryptography, and also digital signatures. So cryptography is the ability to encrypt data end-to-end to ensure the validity and identity verification. Digital signatures are based on cryptography, and then they're used to certify the authenticity of the transactions. One area that we have heard a lot of noise about recently in the last half decade or so is a use case around what are called smart contracts. These are really contracts that are just embedded within the computer code of a blockchain that can implement themselves automatically upon the occurrence of some specified event. Okay, so they're self-executing digital coded contracts. They're kind of an if-then stream of decision-making and stream of execution. So some obvious possible uses are like automatic rent payments, automatic coupon payments, royalty payments, advertising payments for ad clicks on websites, those kinds of things. So payments where there is a relatively clear if-then mechanism are the kinds of payments, the kinds of contracts that would be ripe for adding to a blockchain that allows for the use of smart contracts within the computer code. Not all blockchains allow for that. The Bitcoin blockchain does not, but the Ethereum blockchain does. So with respect to smart contracts, what's different about them other than that they're digital, right? So traditional contracts, you have kind of manual remittance. It can be expensive. There's physical presence sometimes. You have to have lawyers in most cases. They can take a couple of days or weeks to get executed and to confirm a payment mechanism or something similar. With a smart contract, that payment mechanism happens within seconds or minutes, right? It's automatic. It's an automatic remittance. Escrow, in some cases, isn't really necessary. It comes at the fraction of a cost. It's all virtual, all digital. And lawyers may not be quite as necessary, right? There's still some element of the law because you're talking about a contract and agreement between parties, but it may not have the same level of involvement as what you have in the traditional contracts. Some of the benefits with blockchain and distributed ledger technology are, again, it's immutable. There is increased security. It doesn't mean it's totally void in terms of a technology solution of potential fraud and potential issues, but at least in the public blockchain, the distributed ledger that is public, in those contexts, they are in fact immutable. There's increased transparency and they're public because they're publicly available. Now, people would argue that because of the anonymity element, that they can be used by bad actors, right? And certainly that is the case. But even the anonymous individual or group of individuals engaging in some nefarious act using the blockchain, each of them will have some associated information that's on the blockchain that's tied to them. So there still is some level of transparency. Now there's lower transaction costs, arguably increased efficiency because of the time function. It's a permanent ledger. They're distributed records, so there's no one piece that is more accurate than others. It is one record that distributes the authority for review and verification among thousands of nodes, potentially. It uses algorithms and computer power to validate the transactions and update the ledger. This is what we talked about before, the consensus mechanism. It allows for real-time reporting and potentially significantly faster settlement of transactions and payments. Now, something like this, a technology like this that we've seen over the last decade and a half coming to fruition, it does come with challenges. It has had its challenges, right? It's a new line of business, disruption, replacement of potential business lines. It's complex. It's still being developed in some ways. There's new blockchains coming online every day. There's new functions and use cases coming online every day. There is a privacy risk because the blockchain is public. It's been criticized, like I mentioned, for allowing a lot of illegal activities. But there are some elements of transparency that over time we will get better at handling the anonymity component of it. There's still a lot of unknown regulatory considerations. We're getting more attention from state and federal regulators in the United States. It's getting a lot more attention now that we've got the Genius Act passed, now that we have certain other elements of digital assets kind of permeating through our financial system here in the United States, what's already been permeating in a number of other countries throughout the world. So there is a lot of attention in this space. We're getting some updates to the regulatory atmosphere, but they're still slow going at this point. Another challenge is that there's no trusted intermediary. People are familiar in the United States with being able to go to their bank or understanding some of the Federal Reserve System, the backstop of FDIC insurance. but there's no trusted intermediary here. The trust comes from the thousands of distributed nodes who are all racing to verify the transactions and confirm that they are valid and legitimate transactions so that they can be rewarded with, at least in the Bitcoin blockchain context, with Bitcoin. The challenge is that it still can be subject to hacks, although not the kind of hacks that would take over the entire blockchain, more so limited hacks at the user level, not necessarily the node and consensus mechanism level. In terms of use cases, banks and financial institutions have been talking about this for years, obviously in the remittance payment network, and especially the international remittance network. Peer-to-peer networks, payments generally, even things like fully automated bonds is a potential use case. Like I mentioned, using smart contracts in that kind of circumstance. In the corporate context, we've seen use cases around supply chain management, hard asset transactions, again, using self-executing contracts for payments and vendor agreements. Intellectual property, putting intellectual property rights and validations on a blockchain, using the blockchain for insurance purposes, for validation and so forth, for insurance claims and so forth. Those are really strong corporate use cases. The markets, obviously currency exchange, clearing and settlement. There's so many potential use cases, even in the real estate registry space. Imagine replacing title insurance with a blockchain network where you don't have thousands of dollars of title insurance cost every time that you want to purchase a new home, right? Because the reality is the verification would just happen through a blockchain. There's a voting element to it for a potential use case to ensure that the voting mechanism is done correctly, accurately, appropriately. In the healthcare space, patient record systems is a huge use case. Additionally, movement of prescription drugs. And then finally, I mentioned hard asset transactions in the corporate context. One example of that is called Everledger. It's a permanent ledger, and it's for diamond certification. Okay, so if you've seen the movie or heard about blood diamonds, this is an attempt to verify the transactions that occur with respect to diamond certification, to make sure that the diamonds that are certified as non-blood diamonds coming from real diamond mines and in real places where people are paid and so forth. Well, that's one goal of that potential use case with Everledger. Finally, in terms of legal issues, we've got jurisdiction, liability, certainly cybersecurity and data privacy and intellectual property, a lot of different legal issues to work through, even outside just the regulatory context. But suffice to say, things have moved quickly over the last decade, and especially over the last 3 or 4 years. Perhaps one of the most significant legal issues broadly is the fact that digital assets, this distributed ledger technology and what it enables, is a truly borderless system. And so when I mentioned legal issues around jurisdiction and liability and so forth before, each jurisdiction in the world has different laws in place that are related to potentially cybersecurity, data privacy for individuals or investors or companies and so forth, and then also around intellectual property and property rights more broadly. Okay, so if you have a technology that allows for transactions to occur between individuals or entities on a borderless basis, then there are a lot of legal issues that need to be worked through for not only the participants in each particular transaction, but also for the networks themselves and the technology itself, because it is so revolutionary and has the capability and the capacity to really impact in a material way the way that the world conducts business, the way that individuals conduct business on their own behalf and with others. So as we come to a close on this episode, let's just step back and recall some of the basic features, because we're talking about blockchain basics, right? Some of the basic features. Again, it's a massive database. It is a ledger of transactions. In the Bitcoin context, it's a public chain of transactions. In the Bitcoin context, it's distributed. In most contexts, we're going to see a distributed type of ledger. It's immutable and permanent, constantly synchronized, and, at least in my view, highly reliable because it's secured by cryptography. Doesn't mean it's not without its own challenges, like we mentioned, in terms of especially legal issues, the borderless nature of transactions and digital assets more broadly, but there are plenty of other issues that folks will point to. Um, Suffice to say, at the end of the day, I think that blockchain distributed ledger technology will materially change the way that the world conducts business. It may not be tomorrow, but it is moving quickly, and the technology is moving particularly fast in terms of use cases, applications, and possibilities. So, with that, I'll bring us to a close on this episode. If you have any questions on any of our episodes, please reach out to me at jsilvia@dwaynemorris.com or your favorite Dwayne Morris lawyer. Be sure to like and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. I really appreciate you tuning in. Please stay tuned for new episodes coming soon. We've got a couple of different episodes coming up on anti-money laundering compliance and just data privacy class actions. We've got a lot of different stuff coming out. So please stay tuned. I think you're going to really enjoy it. Thanks very much.